Hey everyone! Today we get to experience the previously advertised storm. But just a quick heads up, I've altered some of the sword abilities because I didn't think some of them were legendary enough. Samehada seems to be exponentially better than the rest, for example. So some of the weapons had additions to their pre-existing abilities to keep them interesting. Not a lot of changes, but it was something I realized while writing that half the weapons are cool, and half just aren't as fantastic as they should be. We last left our characters off as they split into three directions. Minato left to pursue Shisui as he seemingly hunted down the Three-Tails Jinchuriki. Four of the Genin, Sasuke, Sakura, Tenten, and Omoi, headed in Shisui's direction as well. Tenten and Omoi are fixated on reclaiming the Kiba Blades. Meanwhile, Sasuke is set on finding and questioning Shisui, and Sakura is going along to make sure he doesn't do anything stupid. Shino and Rock Lee, meanwhile, stayed behind to assist in the stadium's evacuation. For those wondering, as there were a few, Hinata is in the audience. There simply wasn't any room to include her. But she's definitely not forgotten. And finally, we have elites from both sides clashing in the very arena that Genin were attempting to prove their worth in. 6 swordsmen versus the Sannin, Might Guy, Darui, and A. Summary out of the way, let's dive into the fun. With A and Might Guy charging immediately into the fray, the remaining combatants separate out to fight one another. A third of the arena is being consumed by an everlasting sandstorm that occasionally bludgeons the area with powerful, deep grumbling, doubtlessly from the Shukaku sand spirit. A adds to the rumblings with his own groans of frustration as Jinpachi's sword keeps him virtually blind in close quarters. The explosions and impacts from the sword are simply annoying, but not able to see where he's going, A can't exactly go all out. He caught the blade once, but as it began to rapidly explode, it slipped out of his grip. With his lightning cloak fully engulfing him, A has no issues with taking any damage. Were he a more patient man, all he'd really need to do is wait for the opponent to tire themselves out. But he wants their weapons. And if he could see even for just a few seconds, he could strike Jinpachi down with precision accuracy and the power of a bull to end him in one go. The expanding smoke swirls and parts as Might Guy darts through it to meet Kisame in the arena. Though Kisame blocks Might Guy's strikes with his own bare hands, it quickly becomes obvious how dangerous Might Guy is. Swapping to using his sword as a shield, Kisame leaps backward to also dodge A's rampaging. Noticing the stronger guard, Guy's hands become a blur as he weaves seals far faster than Kisame can detect. Leaping toward Kisame and raising a leg, Guy drops a strong axe kick that on contact with the ground kicks up an eruption of fire in a line in front of him. The fire spews high into the air and forms a wall that forces Kisame off in a different direction than he was planning on going. Swinging Samehada at the flames, Kisame grants Guy one big laugh and jumps into the fire, taking the licking flames as an intimidation factor against Guy. Emerging from the fire, Kisame swings Samehada, and despite being at the 6th gate, Guy has to defend with both hands to absorb the blow. Growling at Kisame's strength, Guy considers stepping it up to the 7th gate to close the remaining gap in their strength. However, from his forearms, Guy can feel a sudden weakness as he looks up at the blocked sword and sees it shivering. Kisame remarks that the chakra that releases during the 8 gates is so pure and concentrated that Samehada rarely gets to have such a good meal. Realizing how much chakra he's already lost, the prospect of the 7th gate becomes unrealistic, and Guy begins losing ground. Kisame swings his sword at the shaken Guy, only for it to be blocked by Orochimaru's extending Kusanagi. Immediately after blocking the blow, Orochimaru shrinks the blade back to himself for his own offense against Mangetsu. Depending on Orochimaru's concentration, he can make the blade grow and shrink in fractions of a second. Yet despite the unpredictability of a sword that can grow and shrink through the power of his mind, Orochimaru is finding Mangetsu's reflexes to be utterly perplexing as he tracks and counters every single swing and trick. Wide-angle swings with both hands or quick flourishes, nothing seems to break through Mangetsu's uncanny defending ability. Falling back to his rapid-fire snakes, Orochimaru forgoes the blade for some work with serpentine ninjutsu. Given the nature of Totsuka, Orochimaru knows that ultimately he can't afford to be struck or he'll face some sort of awful ceiling by his opponent's sword. Despite throwing several surprise snakes at Mangetsu and attempting to overwhelm with their sheer number, his opponent overcomes everything. At best, Orochimaru only seems to be able to match Mangetsu. If only they weren't fighting in the village, he'd be able to stretch his wings, so to speak. But turning to look at his companions, he notices they're not much better off. Jiraiya has zeroed in on Zabuza, taking advantage of Harijizo with his spiked hair to protect against Zabuza's weapon strikes. Nearly every destructive action of the Executioner Blade is nullified. Because he has no weapons or space to go to range, Jiraiya must use hand-to-hand and relies on his hair armor to buy time. In variable intervals against Zabuza's alarmingly strong swings, Jiraiya conjures out several mud ball and fireballs at Zabuza. Though Jiraiya is not doing an overwhelming amount of damage to Zabuza, it's enough to shift the battle very slightly in his favor. Meanwhile, Tsunade stops Jinin as he attempts to bypass her to assist Jinpachi against A. Along with his mighty mallet and axe, Jinin is also exceptionally strong. Though he can't match her taijutsu, the power he throws with his weapons are strong enough that she needs to brace the impacts. Though Tsunade has no choice but to dodge the axe swings, she's finding that her counters to his great mallet are cancelling out in strength, instead of blowing him away. The two are trading advantages in terms of strength. But the longer the fight goes on for, the more Tsunade seems to notice a greater force with his weapons. He alternates between axe and mallet swings, and each one seems incrementally stronger, as if he's combining their subsequent momentums into each other. While he should be getting tired and weak, his strikes have greater and greater power. Before long, he will be forcing Tsunade onto the back leg, unless she can find some way to upset his succession of strikes. As another axe falls, Darui crashes into Jinin in a mad bid to dodge Kushimaru's razor-sharp wire. While his long blade is already thin and difficult to track, his wire is nigh invisible as it whips to and fro, slicing and dicing everything in its path. The wire seems to bend and mold around Jinin so as to avoid touching him, while still making contact with and cutting Darui's skin. Likely the least powerful friendly in the bunch, Darui is forced to utilize his rare black lightning for defensive purposes, rather than for offensive as he usually desires. This vastly reduces the cutting force of Kushimaru's flying wire, but doesn't keep Darui entirely safe from it. Meanwhile, Darui's wide sword is large and slow to wield compared to Kushimaru's light, thin, and fast. As Darui's forced on a constant retreat, Kushimaru has the clear advantage as he maintains pace against the Cloud Jonin. Noticing that no one is pushing any particular advantage, except of course Kushimaru versus Darui, Mangetsu recalls the swordsman to him. As Orochimaru extends his blade in a flash to defend Tsunade from Jinin, Mangetsu kicks his hands and forces the blade in a wide arc across the battlefield before Orochimaru can withdraw it again. All the combatants duck or leap out of the blade's destructive path, and the swordsmen take advantage to fall back to Mangetsu. Weaving hand seals in tandem, the six swordsmen conjure a supermassive flood of water that falls into the stadium from all sides. As this excessive roaring of plummeting water smashes into the arena, the Leaf and Cloud combatants flee for cover. A plants himself to the ground, and Shukaku roars in protest of the flooding, expediting its nearly stopped transformation. Taking form finally and instantly, Shukaku roars at the water that's rising to its chest, and foundational cracks sound across the structure of the stadium as it begins to fail to hold the sheer volume of water. Roaring from within the water, A releases a huge burst of electricity that instantly expands the water out like an explosion, and as steam showers the stragglers that are still fleeing the stadium, its walls crack from the force and shatter outward. Landing beside his Raikage, Darui notes that A should have tried to reduce the damage, not aid in it. After all, they were fighting to protect, not destroy. Grumbling at Darui, A flicks his hand and dismisses the destruction, remarking that the Shukaku spirit was going to destroy it anyway at that rate. With the combatants scattered around the stadium and in the midst of the village now, they meet on more open ground. Facing the full form of the Shukaku spirit, Rasa is already ragged from attempting to quell the transformation. Normally, there aren't outside influences keeping the spirit agitated. Having successfully led the citizens to safety before the stadium's destruction, Asuma, Kurenai, Kakashi, and 4 Anbu arrive behind Rasa to assist in caging the Shukaku. Rasa tells them they won't be enough now that the Shukaku's released, wondering if any of them has ever even faced the fox in its fully released form. Asuma nods. He knows the reckless power. Rasa instructs them to follow Asuma's lead then, for even one instant of weakness will be exploited. Looking to the loser's stands, Kakashi asks Asuma where Sasuke is, noting that he has a scroll that can summon Minato. Without Minato, if Shukaku decides to launch any Bijou Dama, there is little they can do to protect the village. Rasa scoffs at the insinuation that he can't do what Minato can. Make no mistake, your assistance will only be in the way of distraction, while I reseal the beast. He tells them to form a circular perimeter around the Shukaku spirit, and only when it appears to be turning their way should they do anything to evade its attention. Meanwhile, when it's not looking at them, they are to launch destructive ninjutsu as powerful as they wish. After all, no matter how much damage they all try to do, it'll ultimately amount to nothing against a tailed beast. As they spread around Shukaku, Rasa slams his hands into the ground, and a great spire of golden sand erupts from the ground, smashing the Shukaku before draping over its shoulder. Shukaku lifts as a show of force and carries the burden along with it, but before it can move any closer to the village, Rasa throws another spire, assisting the first on the Shukaku spirit's other shoulder. Panting, Rasa wonders why the beast is so much stronger than normal. Or perhaps it's just angrier than usual. Looking down at Rasa, recognizing him, Shukaku's jaw widens as Kakashi's prediction comes true and a Bijou Dama forms. Should that impact the ground, it would destroy half the village. So Rasa manipulates his golden sand to form a concave shield in front of the Bijou Dama. Before Shukaku finishes charging it, Rasa pushes the shield into the incomplete Bijou Dama, which causes it to fall into Shukaku and exploding upon his body. Though the sand cushions much of the explosion, the surrounding ninja have to take cover to avoid injury themselves. As the sand settles, they re-emerge to resume their distractions and see a great crater in Shukaku's chest from the blast, though the beast appears to have barely slowed down. Wailing in disapproval, Shukaku's great tail swings erratically, crushing trees hundreds of meters away. Ducking from the sudden shock, the 7th swordsman cringes at the thought of the tail striking him directly as it lifts away again. A flash of light on his right side notifies him to an attacker, and he ducks just in time for the kunai to miss his head. Rolling and finding his footing, he brandishes the kiba blades at the direction of the kunai and charges chakra into the swords. Enraged that Shisui left him behind in a village he's never been in, the swordsman abandons the idea of assisting the former Leaf Shinobi and turns to his new opponent. Emerging from the trees, Omoi brandishes his sword and swings it at him. Though he parries the strike, his vision warbles as a kunai slices clean through his head and his watery body reforms. Raising the second kiba blade to Sasuke, the swordsman begins fighting both simultaneously. An explosive kunai falls down from above, and as Omoi and Sasuke retreat in sync with one another, the tagged kunai explodes in his face, rupturing his body almost completely. Barely maintaining a grip of the swords, he reforms his body and spins to meet Tenten as she attacks him from yet another angle. Lightning surges through both blades as he forces all three back so he can regain control. Giving both sides room to breathe, Sakura shouts for them to scatter as Shukaku's tail slams down over top them. Attacking his body directly, Kakashi cleaves a Raikiri into Shukaku as if his body were butter. However, just as quickly as he damages it, sand falls into the cut and heals it instantly as if no damage had ever been done. Asuma conjures a great fireball the size of Shukaku's head on his other side that sears its skin black, but again, sand trickles over the damage and it dissolves away immediately. One of the Anbu fires a great spear of water through Shukaku's back, but its dry, sandy body drinks up the water and remains unblemished. Asuma remembers the fox's attack during Naruto's birth and how indifferent the beast was to everyone's combined attacks back then as well. Even his father, as powerful as he was, could not do any lasting damage to the fox. It never bled, it never seemed hurt by anything anyone tried to do. Even when Minato redirected its own blasts back at it, the fox would brush the attack off as if it were a flick from someone's fingers. It was nearly unstoppable, just as the Shukaku seemed completely unperturbed by their strongest attacks. How Rasa managed to cage the beast on like a weekly basis was beyond Asuma. Turning to look at him, Shukaku raises one of its arms and swings low, obliterating the rubble remains of the stadium. Leaping over the strike, Asuma lands on Shukaku and runs up to its shoulder, leaping to its head. Throwing one of his specialty blades into Shukaku's right eye, Asuma charges as much wind chakra as he can, causing the blade to tunnel deep into Shukaku's head. Assuming evasive action immediately, Asuma jumps clear to watch the beast flail about as it becomes half blind. However, almost as quickly as his knife went into its head, its eye reformed as if nothing had happened. Clicking his tongue at its unstoppability, Asuma lands again in his position and shrugs at Kurenai beside, unsure of how to distract the beast. Finished with aiding the villagers flee from the surrounding area, Hinata looks down at the growing destruction. She stands atop some cliff stairs, much like where Iruka was during the Kanon Konoha crush. The Shukaku spirit seems to be at least kept stationary by whoever's distracting it, but the crying of steel against steel down below informs her of other fights expanding out into the village. She wonders if she can do anything more to aid the village's defense as the Shukaku spirit slams its tail into the ground. The resulting quake sends Hinata flying from the cliff. Activating her Byakugan, she searches the trees below for the safest landing, catching herself in some branches down below. The clanging metal she'd heard before is far more present now, as she looks up to see Darui resuming his matchup against Kushimaru, who is recklessly destroying everything between him and Darui to remove obstacles and cover. Without her ninja tools on her, Hinata can't do anything particularly effective to assist in this fight. And, judging from the skill level of the fighters, she'd only be seen if she tried to flee. Deciding it's best to stay in the tree, Hinata's eyes go wide as it falls to pieces around her, and she falls to the ground with the chopped up tree. As she pushes herself up, a hand grips from the back of her neck and lifts her into the air. Almost as if using her as a shield, the tall, thin swordsman taunts Darui to action rather than run away, if he'd prefer not to see her die. And that's the end of today. Whew! It might sound a bit silly, but it's really hard to write so much non-stop action. The battle for Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings took place in like 2.5 pages. It's so much easier to write the in-between stuff. There are so many combatants all over the place that I'm not going to be giving these fights as much attention as I did during the Chunin exams. The reasons are pretty simple. I don't want this arc to stretch overly long, but also we know what these characters can do already, so I'm sort of relying on everyone's imagination to expand on the nitty-gritty of these sequences. When I say that Orochimaru falls back on his snakes as a tool, he's slithering around like a creep, he's climbing out of his own mouth when he takes unnecessary damage, etc. Next week, we'll see whether they manage to subdue the Shikaku spirit. We'll get the continuation of the Genin battle against Suigetsu, and we'll get to see some of the swordsman's battles. As you saw at the end there, Hinata was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But how will Darui deal with her being used as a shield? Does he know the significance of her as heiress to the Hyuga family? Are the Cloud ruthless enough to sacrifice a random citizen for a chance at victory? Only time will tell. Oh, also, Asuma was present for the Fox's attack in my rewrite, though I believe he was off with that royal guard in canon, absent for the event. I figure him being present for his own father's death would be more significant for character development. Not to say he wasn't in that royal guard outfit, just that at that moment of the Fox's attack, he was in Konoha. The sky's the limit.